Summer hit the Missouri Valley with that thick, syrupy heat that makes every living thing slow down. You could hear the air humming, cicadas grinding like overheated machinery. For most teenagers around Fulton County, summer meant boredom unless you caught a temporary job. That's how Danny, Jess, Mark, and Lena ended up sweating on Earl Whitmore's hayfield. Earl was a 70-year-old widower with skin the color of bark and hands that looked like they'd been carved from old rope. He paid cash, $10 an hour, no questions asked. The only rule? Don't go into the barn after sunset. At first, nobody cared. The farmhouse creaked, but had air conditioning. The old radio in the barn spat out classic country. Earl kept a jug of lemonade that tasted faintly metallic, but icy cold. On day 3, Danny disappeared during lunch break. Earl leaned on his rake and muttered, "Boy probably walked down to the gas station," though there wasn't one within 5 miles. He sent the rest of them back to work. That evening, Jess noticed something odd. The stray cat that usually hung around the porch sat hiss-still, eyes fixed on the barn door. When wind rattled the latch, the cat bolted into the weeds. Inside, a dim light flickered, the glint of a lantern maybe. Lena whispered that she saw someone standing between the hay bales, tall but bent wrong, shoulders swelling out in uneven humps. Earl caught her looking and barked, "You mind your own shift, girl." Rain rolled in before midnight. The kids slept in an old bunkhouse beside the field, tin roof drumming. Jess woke up when she heard footsteps scrape on the porch outside. Slow, deliberate, dragging something heavy. Through the window, she saw Earl crossing toward the barn, hauling what looked like a burlap sack that squirmed. A muffled choking sound came from inside it. Jess shook Lena awake, but when they looked again, the field was empty except for the rain. By morning, the hay bales near the barn had been rearranged into neat, identical stacks, each tied with fresh twine, dew-wet, and smelling faintly of bleach. Earl claimed he couldn't sleep, decided to organize for efficiency. Mark finally convinced them to confront him. He was the oldest, had a beat-up Ford and a half-formed sense of invincibility. When he pried open the barn at noon, the air hung thick like syrup. Stacks of hay rose up round them, golden walls with narrow corridors. There were flies, hundreds of them, and a sweet, foul smell. They found Danny's phone first, half buried in the straw, screen cracked, still recording. On the grainy video, static, heavy breathing, whispers from someone begging, "Mr. Earl, please, my mama's gonna," and a wet crunch that made Jess drop the phone. Earl appeared behind them so quietly, Mark didn't notice until the shovel hit his back. Jess woke tied to a post, wrists biting against nylon rope. Earl sat on a hay bale beside her, calmly sharpening a sickle. "You kids got no respect for land anymore. Used to be young folks worked honest, left a piece of themselves in the field. That's how you feed the soil." When he dragged Mark's limp body past, Jess saw something worse than blood. His skin was covered in straw, twisted into it as if fused. Earl pushed him into the haystack and began to hum an old gospel tune, pressing the sickle tip gently against Jess's throat. This field remembers blood, makes the crop grow stronger. Lightning split the sky outside, revealing the hay mound breathing, rising and falling with wet, muffled gasps. Inside the hay, half-rotten faces pressed out like bubbles underwater. Danny's eyes, open, pleading. Jess sliced her wrists free on the nail of a post and grabbed the lantern. Fire licked up the twine instantly. Dry hay became a giant lung, exhaling smoke. Earl screamed her name, not in anger, in something like grief and stumbled after her into the storm. By the time the fire trucks found the place, the barn had collapsed into a glowing skeleton. 2 bodies identified, Earl Whitmore and Mark. No sign of Danny or Lena. Jess found walking barefoot 5 miles down the county road, hair singed, mumbling about shadows that work the night shift. Next summer, new owners bought the land cheap. They baled hay for livestock and swore the yield was unnaturally rich. But at dawn, when mist hung low, neighbors sometimes saw figures still moving in the field, scything quietly though the air was still. If you listened hard, you could hear both the creak of old wood and a teenager's voice whispering from the hay. Mr. Earl says work ain't over yet.
August near Baton Rouge always smelled like wet iron. When the river rose that summer, the back roads drowned in mud, and emergency crews begged for volunteers to check the isolated farmsteads. 5 college friends from New Orleans signed up. It sounded noble and Instagram-worthy. They took an old van and made jokes about bayou ghosts while the rain hammered down. On day 3, they reached Bayfield, a ghost of a town, blurred by Spanish moss and mosquitoes. A single farmhouse sat on a hump of dry ground. Beside it grew an enormous white ash tree, roots snaking straight into an old stone well. The house looked uninhabited, but for a plastic Jesus nailed to the porch. They split tasks. Luke checked the generator, Nina and Kayla scouted for food, and Jamal and Ben hunted for clean water. The sink coughed brown sludge. Ben peered into the well, dark as an unplugged socket. At first he smelled sulfur, then felt a cool draft rising, as if the ground itself exhaled. "Water's down there," he said, lowering a bucket. When he pulled it up, the rope twitched, not from weight, but from something moving. What spilled out wasn't water. It was cold gray liquid full of stringy hair. Jamal gagged, shoved the bucket aside. "Leave it, man." But that night, Ben swore he heard whispering outside, like someone deep underground calling his name through a drain pipe. He went missing before dawn. By noon, the fields steamed. They searched for Ben until the heat migraine blurred their eyes. Nina kept saying the word submerged again and again, like her brain looped. Kayla found the rope coiled neat beside the well, ends damp, tied into a perfect fisherman's knot. Ben didn't know knots. Jamal wanted to leave, but the road back was washed out. The van sat at the edge of a sinkhole, wheels half buried in muck. Luke tried the radio, static. That evening, they built a fire on the porch. The air was dead quiet. No frogs, no insects. Nina finally whispered, "It's not water down there. It's a mouth." They laughed because it was easier than admitting she might be right. Just after midnight, Luke vanished too. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows. Kayla awoke to a splash. She pointed the flashlight toward the well, ripples across the surface, widening circles like someone just dove in. When she leaned closer, something brushed the back of her neck. Wet fingers, slick as eel skin. She screamed and fell backward. The light caught Luke's phone half buried in mud. Its camera had been recording. On screen, Luke staring at the well, Steve sliding down his temples. He smiles suddenly, oddly peaceful, then whispers, "I can see where the river ends," then steps forward until water fills the frame. Morning brought mosquitoes again, thick clouds of them. The survivors, Jamal, Nina, Kayla, packed everything. They would walk out through the swamps if needed. But when they reached the tree line, the path they'd driven in on was gone, replaced by standing water that reflected the house upside down. A voice rose from that reflection. It sounded like Ben, drained of breath. "You can't leave, not after drinking." Kayla realized her canteen water tasted metallic, same as the well. She vomited, but clear, cold water spilled from her mouth and something glimmered inside it, like minnows made of glass. By dusk, Nina was talking to the well, just standing there, lips moving silently. Jamal tried to drag her away, but the roots of the ash tree shifted, serpentine, and something inside the bark opened an eye. She fell in without a sound. Jamal speared the soil with a broken shovel, screaming her name. The tree bled a dark, brackish sap that smelled like the ocean. Then it rained again. Kayla and Jamal retreated inside the house. Every corner oozed moisture. The wallpaper seemed to breathe. From below the floorboards came humming, many voices braiding into one. Water doesn't forget its drinkers. At 3 a.m., Kayla awoke alone. Rain had stopped. The silence was violent. The front door stood open. Down the path to the well glowed a faint blue light. Jamal's voice drifted from it, calm, almost cheerful. "We can fix it. We can make it pure." She followed because loneliness is stronger than fear. When she reached the rim, she was nowhere, only his flashlight resting on the stones, beam pointing straight down. The water, or whatever it was, looked solid, mirror flat, reflecting only sky. Then, her reflection smiled without her. It mouthed, "You were always thirsty." Weeks later, the flood receded. A rescue team found the farmhouse collapsed, the well sealed over by the ashen tree's roots. Inside, dry as bone, lay 5 sets of footprints that stopped abruptly, pointing inward. They never found the bodies, but witnesses along the bayou swore that on certain misty mornings, the river speaks. Soft voices threaded through the reeds, counting upward as if naming those who drowned. And if someone's foolish enough to whisper, "Who's there?" the water answers in chorus, "We are."
Miles and Claire Douglas were the kind of Brooklyn couple who believed simplicity cured anxiety. After too many layoffs, they sold their apartment, bought 10 acres in northern Alabama, and moved into a 1920s farmhouse painted a shade of optimism, off-white with teal shutters. They called it Restart Acres, laughing over boxed wine on the first night. The realtor warned them about the reclusive neighbor, Mr. Colby, who lived beyond the tree line. "Nice enough, just don't wander onto his property. He's a sculptor, real private." The first week felt like fresh air therapy. Garden beds, stars bright enough to sting. Only at night, when the wind shifted, came a low metallic clanging, irregular, hollow, slowed by distance. Claire said it was farm machinery. Miles wasn't so sure. On Wednesday, a note appeared on their porch in precise handwriting. "Welcome, neighbors. Supper tonight, 7 p.m. Colby." Claire saw it as a chance to be polite. Miles wanted to decline, but she insisted. "Isolation breeds paranoia," she said. Colby's house was a one-story structure leaning into the woods. The yard held dozens of human-sized clay statues, pale and unnervingly detailed. A woman brushing hair, a boy mid-laugh, a dog crouched to leap. Each wore the faint glaze of something once wet. Inside the house smelled of kiln dust and raw meat. Mr. Colby himself was tall, gray-eyed, neat beard. He served venison stew and talked about capturing truth before it disappears. When Miles asked where he found his models, Colby smiled slowly. "Small towns are full of people who want to be seen. I make them eternal." The Douglases' rescue dog, Gordo, vanished the next morning. They searched until dusk, calling his name through the pines. Near the property line, Miles found a patch of churned earth and a deep footprint, barefoot, heel wide as his palm. That night, Claire heard scratching outside. She opened the curtain to find one of Colby's clay figures now facing their house. Yesterday, it had been turned toward the forest. Miles wanted to confront him, but Claire begged him not to make enemies. "He's probably just eccentric," she said, voice shaking. 2 nights later, Miles followed the metallic noises into the trees. Moonlight spilled over Colby's shed, a corrugated studio pulsing with orange glow. From inside came the steady rhythm of hammer on steel, then a soft human moan. Miles peered through a crack in the wall. Inside stood a figure under bright floodlights. Someone, hanging upright, coated in thick white clay, eyes fluttering under the crust. Colby circled the form, pressing his hands lovingly against its shoulders. The person, woman, tried to speak, but her mouth filled with paste. Miles ran. Branches tore his arms like wire. By morning, he'd convinced himself it was a bad dream. Clay dust on his shoes disagreed. He told Claire, voice trembling. She stared at him as if watching someone slide off sanity's edge. She drove into town, but returned before noon, pale. "People know him," she whispered. "They say he used to teach sculpture at the community college. Then his wife died in a kiln explosion. He never left the woods after that." That afternoon, another statue appeared at the property line. A man with hands raised, mouth open mid-scream. Its facial features were unmistakably Miles. He stormed to Colby's porch with a shotgun. The door stood open, a smell of earth and vinegar drifting out. Colby called from the dark hallway. "You shouldn't rush the creative process." He stepped into view wearing a clay-smeared apron. "I needed a mold before time took your shape." They struggled. The gun went off, shattering a jar of glaze that hissed like acid on the floor. Miles stumbled back through the studio, catching glimpses of arms, legs, torsos stacked like lumber, some still bearing tattoos. The kiln at the center of the room roared with crimson light. Inside, something moved. He overturned a drum of turpentine. Fire grabbed the air instantly. Back at the house, Claire saw the smoke and ran. She found him on the gravel drive, coughing, face streaked gray. The woods behind him blazed. "We have to go," she rasped. But from the fire came shapes, dozens of them, walking, cracking, glowing orange from within. Bodies of clay splitting to reveal charred flesh. They moved stiffly, eyes blind, but mouths open, exhaling kiln heat. Among them, the newest figure, a woman, small, familiar, clutching a dog against her chest. Claire screamed and dragged Miles toward the truck. The tires spun in ash. Something slammed against the window. Colby, burned but smiling, whispering, "Every masterpiece needs a final glaze." Only one body was recovered, an unidentifiable male fused with ceramic fragments. Officials wrote the fire off as chemical ignition. Reporters called it the sculptor's inferno. A year later, a roadside art gallery opened 20 miles north. Its main attraction, anonymous clay figures supposedly rescued from the blaze. Tourists loved the realism. The gallery owner said they came from a visionary recluse named Colby, whose techniques can never be repeated. At night, the janitor swore he heard faint scratching from inside the display cases, like something trying to shape itself into a scream. And when security lights flickered, one statue on the end, woman with teal earrings, always seemed to have shifted a little closer to the door.